So I just want to share a few thoughts here in my hairy vest. I was wrestling with, I don't know if you can see that. I was wrestling with my dog last night, and this is as close to the hairy garment of John the Baptist or Elijah that I'm going to have. Jokes aside, the bad jokes aside, the man, my head's swimming with thoughts. I'm done writing for the day. I need to go work. But before I do that, I wanted to just clear off a little list I have of things that I've been putting off making videos about. So the one topic is this idea of better comprehending the cost benefit of modern technology as it pertains to information. So this is a big topic. And these topics I'll write about in a book on at least part of the end times, and maybe a little bit in a book on teaching. So it's going to be scattered around a bit, probably in a few other places as well. But I wanted to give a very brief overview of some of these ideas so that you don't have to wait to get turning on that and thinking about how this is going to affect your life and what changes you might make accordingly. So historically, information was much more limited than it is today in terms of the quantity and how readily distributed it was. So maybe it's better to say how readily distributable it was. Now we have the internet is the biggest change. We obviously have the ability to call people, to text people. Those are directed communications, but we have the ability to post videos on YouTube, and it is absolutely available to everyone, almost instantaneously and almost for free. So there are homeless people who are watching this video or some other video. There are people that I've known and been among in countries where they do not have enough food to eat, but they have cell phones. And it's a very interesting situation. If you go backwards through time, you'll get to the point that was pre-internet, which fewer and fewer people remember as the years go by. And then you get to a time that was pre-modern travel. You get to before telephones, you get to before telegraphs, you get to the age of long distance travel across the seas being limited to boat. You get to pre-steam engine on those boats. It's just sailboats. And all of a sudden the bandwidth, which we know all about as modern people, what that idea conveys, the bandwidth just reduces as you go backwards through time. And if you go back far enough, all of a sudden you're in a situation where what you know is limited to the people you know in your immediate surroundings. And so principally this is your family, maybe the people you live with in a town, you work with, etc. And you would just be rooted in a place, and that's kind of your knowledge would be geographically bounded. And in such situations, things are very different in a lot of ways, and one of those is that it becomes very evident that there's an information differential among people that is not situational. So there is obviously, in modern times, one of the inputs to the information you have access to is your situation. But in historic times, so for almost the entire history of humankind, the controlling variable on how much information you had access to was obviously the people that you had access to and how much information they have. And you would see it'd be very obvious that some people somehow knew way more about a lot more things than other people. And besides this universal sort of condition, I don't know how else to phrase this right now, what my mind goes to is in data science, when you have two graphs and one line is always above the other, and being up is good, whatever the graph might be, it's called dominating, and that's a really badly connoted word in common conversation. So I'll have to think, if you have a better idea for how to describe that, that's not so offensive, please let me know, and I'll gladly adopt it. Anyway, besides that situation where the lines never touch and one's always above the other, there are many, many, many more situations where someone knows something more than you in a specific topic. So for example, one of my buddies is a self-trained blacksmith. I don't know the first thing about that. I have no idea how to do that. One of my sons is really good at CSS, and I'm terrible at it, right? And so whenever I hit something with that, I'm like, hey, can you do this? And he does it, right? And so I spend my time on the things that where I produce greater value, and he focuses on that, and that's a great thing. We should all do that. We work together. Anyway, so that's historically, right? How information was distributed and what that was like. Okay, so another huge difference though is with this ability to just fire off information and just throw it out there into cyberspace for anyone to find at basically no cost. A few things critically are different. A few things are critically different. So in historic times, a person who had information could also set up a gateway to access that information. And so you had guilds, and I'm talking cross domains, right? You had guilds, apprenticeships, all sorts of things where, or parents would pass down information to children, grandparents, whatever. They didn't just sort of throw it out there willy-nilly. Even though, I won't go as far as to call it human nature, but I think there is a tendency, a widespread desire to share knowledge when it's possessed. And this is very much with us today still. It's shocking to meet people who are highly successful, however you define that, it doesn't matter. And they tend to be extremely happy to share lessons that they've learned. They'll almost go out of their way in many cases. I mean, I've been taken out to lunch by people who've been successful in business, for example, who introduced themselves and said, I'm happy to help you, or you're starting a business, let's chat about this. And they pay for lunch. It's just nuts, right? So that's not always the case, but I'm saying it's an abundant enough quality that to be taken aside by a grandmother or grandfather and they just want to share their wisdom with you. And it's not going to help them, right? Because they for sure, they already have the benefits of whatever it is that they know. But a lot of these people aren't going to be around for very much longer. It's always the case, right? So wisdom tends to co-occur with experience, and not always. Experience doesn't imply wisdom, but wisdom almost always implies experience. And experience doesn't imply age. The book, I just made a series of videos on a book that I reviewed, and the book ends when the guy's 20. He wrote a biography about the first 20 years of his life, and he was older than that, much older than that when he wrote it. So that's crazy. Most people don't live life full enough to write a biography worth reading in 70 years of life. So that just goes to show you again about differentials. But anyway, we're trying to focus on information and time and things here in this video. So there were gateways where people could ensure that the transmission of information conveyed the greatest benefit, because knowledge is sequential, it's hierarchical, it's progressive. So it builds on itself. Truth cleaves to truth. Light grows lighter, right? There there are ideas that you can only understand based on prerequisite understanding. And if you were to share things that are higher in the pyramid without the base, the best possible outcome is continued ignorance. That's a crazy thought. If you convey information without the basis, it's probably either going to be misunderstood, used to harm, cause harm to the person you're sharing it with, or not just be devalued, but this is the idea of the swine turning on you when you try to give them pearls, where the value of what you're trying to help someone see is so far removed from their understanding that they actually perceive it as harmful, and they try to hurt you in response to your trying to love them. And I realize how crazy that's going to sound to some people. If I had time, I'd lay out a case for this from the scriptures. It's very easy to do and extremely persuasive, if I dare say so myself. But just to say this very briefly, the fact is, the more valuable something is, the less valuable it will seem to those who don't have it already. And this is, in a nutshell, why it's so hard to be God. Because he has the things of greatest worth that aren't just things. They're ways of being, ways of feeling and thinking, whys, not just whats. And yet, it is harder for him to convey that than it would be to transmit any other possible information, because those things go together. So anyway, historically, it was quite simple. In fact, it was sort of baked into the pie. It was an intrinsic part of the system that conveying information had to occur in systems that prevented transmission, prevented overly free transmission, if that makes sense. So you didn't just hand a little boy a box of dynamite and say, have fun, hope you figure out how to mine valuable minerals and not blow yourself up. My great-grandfather's brother blew himself up with dynamite and died. And then I think another brother lost a couple of his fingers in the accident or something. It's just the things that happened back then. But anyway, but this wasn't a common thing to hand kids a box of dynamite. They weren't handed anything. I think they found something in a shack or something. But they weren't handed anything, and the guy ended up without a hand. Sorry. Somebody died, so it's not funny, but, I guess with time we can laugh about some things. Historically, these controls were in place. I keep looking down, but this is not on my note sheet. I'm thinking. Controls were in place, and the fact is that nearly none of those controls are in place today. In fact, what is in place is the complete opposite of that. And so there's a whole pot of topics that go under the heading of why the entire world will be destroyed. And this is one of them. So maybe I should have led by saying that at the beginning of the video. But anyway, transmission of information always comes with a cost. I don't know if you realize it or not, but reality is this world is a very carefully orchestrated and organized environment where we are insulated from almost every consequence. So just as an extremely brief sample of the larger argument for this principle, consider the Earth and think about just where we are in the solar system and just how small the tolerance is. If the Earth were just a little bigger, just a little smaller, or just a little further from the sun, or just a little closer to the sun, or if we didn't have a moon, or if the moon wasn't exactly the size it is, in exactly the place it is, in exactly the orbit it is, how life could not be supported as we know it on this planet. It's all exactly the way it needs to be. Why? So that this Earth is not like other planets that we know of in the solar system or beyond. And why? Because it provides this massively curated situation that is completely unlike all others that we know of. In other words, it's so far from raw, average nature that it allows an extremely different situation here than if we just plucked you from where you are and chucked you even, 100,000 miles from where we are on this earth. And things, you die, obviously, for very many reasons. And you just go one thing down the list and you're dead. And there's a very long list of things that if that didn't kill you, this other thing would. So, the fact is that we're in a situation here where we're insulated from many, 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 many consequences. And it's not that we're on an island of, I reverse this all around. Basically, we're on an island of order in a sea of chaos. That's how you should think of human existence. And in many ways, salvation is about finding the tools to make chaos an island of order. So, it's very hard to say anything about anything when everything is connected to everything, and the more you know about everything, the harder it is to just dial in one thing. Anyway, so the problem with modern information is that information always comes with consequences. And this is a principle that people don't understand. That insulation from consequences, it evaporates as people gain understanding of reality. And here's the kicker. It's not just your understanding that makes you accountable. It's your capacity for understanding. So if you're ignorant of the truth and you have, I wanted to say that you lack the ability to access it. That's not really sufficient, but let's just go with that for now. So let's say you're operating at your full capacity to obtain more, and you're living according to what you have, which incidentally is the case of pretty much nobody. But let's just pretend that we're in this fairy tale land where people actually do what they ought to do, and they don't do what they know better not to do. So in this situation, you are innocent from the consequences of information that's beyond what you have, because you don't have the capacity to get it. Now introduce into this system someone who knows a lot more about things than that person or these people. And now everything changes, because there is this effect of justice that the Lord can only hold back so much. And when the conditions change, the consequences have to change. Now, this is neither good nor bad. It's actually the root of both. So without this differential in information, things can't get better than they are. And unfortunately, though, you can't have the differential of information without the potential for things to get far worse. And in the modern situation with all this information available for almost for free, a couple of things change. One of them is the consequences that we're subject to. Because there are scriptures that say, like, at times the feigned ignorance and the Lord winked at and all these things. But what they're trying to say is information changes consequences. And when certain things are known, done, or revealed by people, everything changes. Known, done, revealed. They're three separate things. You might know something that no one else has ever known since the foundation of the world. If that sounds ridiculous, you don't know the scriptures, because it says over and over and over and over again, the Lord has said that there are conditions that any person can live under which he will reveal to them things that have never been revealed since the foundation of the world. And there are many things that have been revealed to specific people which they have not revealed to others, or which have been bound up by circumstance so that maybe they were known by a group at some point somewhere. They aren't known today, not generally. You can't find someone who knows them today. Anyway, there's a whole space of all that. So, if a person knows one of those things, everything changes for various reasons. If a person lives according to that stuff that they know, everything changes for various reasons. If a person reveals to others those things that they know, everything changes for various reasons. And I hope you forgive me for trying to be as general as I can with this. I just want to sort of throw some principles out, and then you can chew on them. And I'll fill in the blanks later, as I have time. So, when we talk about what is revealed, what forms will it be revealed in? Well, how about videos by a random guy on YouTube? How about blogs by a random person on the internet? Or books written by random people? And it doesn't matter who is doing this. What matters is what's contained in those things, because it changes everything. So I will tell you that there has never been a time in history where these mechanisms of revelation have been available to humankind. In very recent times, the printing press was invented. Before that, to send something beyond your immediate surroundings, information, not something, but information, you'd have to have somebody writing it out. And guess what? I mean, if something like 90% of every human's time was spent just trying to find enough food to eat or to preserve it, who the heck is going to have 80 hours a week to copy out, not to mention the money for the paper, because we take that for granted. It's like you don't think of the cost of paper. Even when you have kids and you're homeschooling and it's like a fortune in school supplies, you don't think about the cost of paper. It's expensive. Historically, it's astronomically expensive. And then the time. And someone would have to be feeding these monks who are copying stuff. And that's the only people who copied stuff were folks in religious orders, because they didn't have lives to live outside of that. Their whole life is crouching over a table by candlelight copying things out. And someone had to pay for that because they needed to be fed. So we live in a really, really, really unique time where for free, basically, random people can spend time writing books and making videos. And that doesn't even mention the time and effort and everything else that goes into actually learning these things, and what you have to do in your life to come to the point where God tells you these things. So it changes everything. And this is a grand key in understanding the end times. Specifically, why there will be so much destruction. This is one major reason. There are other reasons, and they all sort of weave together. But it explains a whole bunch of other stuff about the end times too. So it's probably worth thinking about this as you study and pray and learn and live, to think about just what is being made available and how readily accessible and inexpensive it is. So, as a piece of this, I just don't want to forget to mention this one thing, which is, bear with me. Okay, this is really important. It turns out that this is true of all information. And information is a really interesting topic, and there are a lot of people who deal with this professionally, including myself. But one property that information has is if you have data points, what you'll find is there's this concept of noise, which is a signal that's in what you're looking at, what you're observing, but it's not what you're interested in. That's noise. So if you're old enough to remember having to tune a radio, you go through areas where there's no discernible signal and you're trying to find the actual channels. Or on a TV, again, if you're old enough to remember that, having to turn the dial and move the rabbit ears and whatever, you're trying to get the signal out of the noise. So it turns out that when things are revealed, it follows this same principle. Anywhere there's signal, there will also be noise. In other words, reality is not this uniform sea of information. There is, or value, or intensity, or any of these things. They're extremely varied, and that variety, it happens in clusters. So there are clusters of value, there's clusters of information, and when you have information, and it's a sea where you have these spots of relative abundance. When you have that signal, that's where the noise will also cluster. And so this principle could be explained in a bunch of different ways. Like, I was going to say where there's smoke, there's fire, but that doesn't fit here. Where something real of value exists, you will get clusters of counterfeits. So that's a really interesting example, because in human behavior you see this. Like, what do hackers go after? Do they go after targets of low value or targets of high value? Well, high value, right? It's the same work either way. You go for the work, you invest your work in the spot that's going to give the greatest return, right? If you're smart. But this happens with information too. And so you think, well, what does the adversary cluster his efforts on? Does he spend all of his efforts on people who aren't really going to amount to much in their life, for good or evil? No. Why would he? He clusters his efforts on those who can be really good or really evil. Why? Right? So in information, the same thing happens. This is something people really need to understand, because what happens is when you have a real idea of real value, it gets surrounded by these counterfeits. And people become so accustomed to seeing the counterfeit in that topic that they will attack the real thing when it appears. The best example of this is Jesus. That's like, I say this in every video. The best example of this is Jesus. Because he really is the example in all things. Anyway, I was going to tell you a story about that, but I'll skip over it. So when Jesus came, he was the Messiah. But all these people had come before, right about at that time, as fake messiahs, as false messiahs. And so by the time he showed up, people were so sick and tired of this idea of Messiah, and they were pre-coded, they were predisposed to presume that anyone coming saying that they were the Messiah was a false Messiah, and that they would end the same way as all the others had, failing to do what the Messiah was prophesied to do. And what's interesting is to read through the Gospels with the question of how often did Jesus say he was the Messiah? I will leave that to you. It's a very interesting question, and the answer might surprise you. Anyway, but he was the real deal, and all the others weren't. And so the question is, does the appearance of counterfeits prove that the real thing isn't real or isn't of value? And the answer is obviously no. If anything, listen carefully, the appearance of counterfeits demonstrates the reality and value of the real thing. Why? Because noise co-occurs with signal. So if you find noise, odds are there's something real of value close by. It's like an indicator above ground of a buried treasure. And so that's where you dig, right? And so you really need to clear out your eyes and focus around those areas, because you're going to find a real thing of tremendous value. So I'll leave it at that, but think about that in terms of information. And wrapping all this up, merging these ideas explicitly, think about the signal to noise ratio of what you find in these channels of nearly free information. So if you jump on YouTube and you just look at a random smattering of what's in your face, almost all of it is complete garbage. And you're better off not watching it at all than watching it. It's true of books, it's true of movies, it's true of music. So when it comes to information, the vast majority of it is less than neutral. You'll be worse off for experiencing it than not. And yet, what tremendous gems of value are out there. I was just, someone emailed me and we had hashed through this idea. He was writing something and wanted to bounce an idea off of me. And he reminded me of this book I have on my shelf that I read a couple of years ago. I was like, So he pointed me towards a specific chapter, and I was kind of quickly looking through it. And I thought to myself, this is such a valuable book. And I've read it before. And just looking over it again, I was just like, thank God that he wrote this book. And I thought, and disclaimer, this is going to sound crazy, but I'm dead serious. I thought if I didn't know the things that were in this book, and the only way I could get this book was to crawl on my hands and knees across the United States to get it, I would do it. So most people can't even think of a book that would be worth doing that. They wouldn't even do that for the scriptures. You can think like, man, Rob, you must be a real weirdo. No. The principle here is very important. Your max range of value of whatever you associate with it doesn't matter. If you had a range of value from you couldn't care less to this is the maximum I care about anything, you need to understand that that range is not the same for all people. And whatever you have does not reflect the potential of what a human can have, including yourself. Your range of value can change. It goes off screen, right? It goes way wider than my arms can stretch. That's super important. And that's not the purpose of this video, but we got into it because I was saying that information can also have way more value than you've ever valued anything. Like way more value. Orders of magnitude more value. It is not incorrect to say that the Father sent the Son and the Son suffered all he did because of the value of the information he conveyed. And what is that information? What the Father is like. Because that is so far from what you can imagine on your own. You'd never imagine it. You could live for 3 billion years on this planet somehow. You'd never have the faintest idea what the Father was like without Jesus doing what he's doing. Sorry, I keep getting battery warnings. So I'll wrap this up. I've thrown a lot at you. It's stuff to think about. But it turns out that the value of many pieces of information that are already here and that are coming very soon are definitely worth crazy things like crawling across the country on your hands and knees. And if you don't believe that, the good news is experiences are coming to you that will help you correct your value structure. It's not going to seem like good news as you're going through it, but it is good news. The other good news is that it truly is worth all of that. So open your eyes and pay attention to what's been so freely given you, and prepare your hearts for what's coming, because you are accountable. You are completely accountable for everything that has been revealed, and you will be held accountable for everything that's coming. The world is accountable. There has never been a time where this information has been so freely given, because all the gateways are crushed. They don't come with these venues. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, sorry, I'm supposed to tell you this too, that that crushing of the gateways, this free giving, don't think of it in terms of a limitation in technology, because it's quite easy for a servant of God to sit there with their mouth shut until someone is ready and willing to be inspired to come to them, to just go crawl up onto a mountaintop and wait for people to come, and then to ask them, sitting cross-legged, the 3 questions. If you can answer these questions, you're prepared for the wisdom I have to give you. It's very easy for someone to do that. It's much, much preferable to doing anything else. The reason they don't is because certain negative, dark entities and bodies of information are released and are on this planet and will be coming to this planet. And they're authorized by the Father. Nothing happens here without his permission. There is a counter that has to be revealed. The die is set, the bonds are broken. It has to come out now. Now. In this time, in the end times. That's what it's about. The end times is about information. You might not know that, but now you do. It's all about information. So, it's about information, and it's about reactions to information. That's 100% of what it is. So, it's very important to understand these things. But that's all I can give you for now, with the limits of all of this and my time. And so, it'll be in books, but I've just given you massively valuable information about information. So do with it what you will, but understand that not these things that I've said necessarily or limited to, but all of the things that are being revealed, all of the information that's at your fingertips, this supercomputer that you hold in your hands with this smartphone. It's a supercomputer compared to the 70s or even 80s. It's in your hand. You will be held accountable for what you have access to. Even if you don't care, even if you don't look, and even if you don't believe, the consequences are upon you. So be wise.